It's the Farmer to Farmer podcast, episode 94, and this is your host, Chris Blanchard. Heather Lekx has managed Ignatius Farm since 2001 when she arrived to start a new CSA program at the Ignatius Jesuit Centre in Guelph, Ontario. She currently oversees the vegetable farm, an extensive community garden, and land management for a multiple of independent enterprises at the center's farm, which has served as the well of sustenance for the Jesuit community in the region since 1913. Heather provides insights into the dynamics of farming with an institution, including how the CSA program and the farm developed in a vacuum left by the previous programming, and how the farm became a focal point of the Ignatius Center's identity. We discuss how her role has changed through the years from the initiation of the CSA program to its current 10 acres of production alongside of 250 acres of additional farm production as part of the Ignatius Jesuit Center's larger mission. We also dig deep into Ignatius Farm's process for hiring great employees and interns, from advertising and interviewing through the onboarding process and beyond. Heather helped to start the craft program for Southwest Ontario, and she shares the ways that her farm provides a mission-driven internship program that also provides for the needs of the farm. I felt charged up after talking with Heather, and I'll bet you will too. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is sponsored by Vermont Compost Company, founded by organic crop growing professionals committed to meeting the need for high-quality compost and compost-based living soil mixes for certified organic plant production. VermontCompost.com. And by BCS America. BCS two-wheel tractors are versatile, maneuverable in tight spaces, lightweight for less compaction, and easy to maintain and repair on the farm. Gear-driven and built to last for decades of dependable service. BCSAmerica.com. Heather Lekx, welcome to the Farmer to Farmer podcast.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be here.
I'd like to start off today by having you tell us about Ignatius Farm. Kind of give us the lay of the land there in Guelph, Ontario.
Sure. Okay. So Ignatius Farm is, as you said, located just north of Guelph, Ontario in Canada. And Guelph is a sort of mid-sized city. It is not a metropolis, but it has a very healthy population of folks that are interested in organic and local food, and we think that we have been part of fostering that. So we are predominantly how folks know us is through our community shared agriculture program and our community gardens. And I can talk about numbers about those at some point if you'd like, but those are the main entry points for folks to connect to our farm. We're immediately north of Guelph, and it's sandy loam soils, which are beautiful, the beautiful Guelph loam, and so we have great soils to work with, and we're part of the Ignatius Jesuit Centre. So it's a Catholic-owned property, although most of the staff that work on the farm are not Catholic, and that's a whole other interesting angle about our landscape. But there's a retreat center here, and it's 600 acres of land base that serve the farm and the retreat house and our old growth forest project. So there's this really great blend of people that come from a really local angle for the farm and then from around the world for the retreat house. So it's a pretty amazing place to be.
And it's my understanding that the farm has been around for a long time.
Yeah, so the land base has been owned by the Jesuits since 1913, and the farm has always been part of that. I mean, when the land was first cleared to be a farm, there were only a few owners before the Jesuits took it on to have a school in this site, but historically religious institutions would have a land base for farming to provide food for the folks that are at the institution. And in this case, a bunch of young men were coming to train to become Jesuits. So those young men would actually work on the farm with the Jesuit brothers and be trained by the Jesuit priests. But they would come here for their first 2 years of training. So it was sort of a classic Ontario mixed farm, which would include apple orchards, like a big kitchen garden, livestock, mixed livestock, so cattle, pigs, sheep, chickens, ducks, whatever they chose that year. If it was for a short year for small livestock, but yeah, so it was sort of a classic mixed farm, but serving an institution, which gives it a certain an interesting history in terms of how it's been built and maintained, because some of those Jesuit brothers were amazing at maintaining things and building things and DIYing things in unbelievable ways that we would never do now, but also in really innovative ways, right? So right now we have this root cellar that we don't even know when it was built. The like last oral sort of history of it is like 1940s. We think it was there at some point between 1941 and 1943, but we don't know before then when it was built. And we're using it very actively, and that's why we can have a winter share for our CSA. And we have a greenhouse that was moved here from another Jesuit property when it was sold to become a golf course. But in any case, so this glass house was moved here in the 80s and then was not used actively as a greenhouse until we started the CSA in 2001. So then we had this, so now we have this sort of semi-glass house with plastic sidewalls that you can roll up. But like there are very few farms that are like on our scale of income that would have a glass house, you know. It's just sort of unbelievable to have that for your seedlings. So it's a beautiful place to work in the spring.
I've worked in a glass house, on a farm and as well as at the university, and man, I mean, it's something else. It's different than working under plastic.
Oh, it's unbelievable. It's like March in that house is so enlivening. So we do all our seedling production there, and it's also such a great, even though it's not a big greenhouse, it's such a great teaching space as well for our interns, because they all arrive and in the early spring, you know, and they start all of their sort of production knowledge starts in the greenhouse, which is such a, you know, when you can see all the different plant families just by like the cotyledonal leaves, you know, those first two leaves, they like so many things can make sense in a greenhouse when you see it all together. So it's just a great place to be and to teach. So I love that house. I feel very lucky to have it.
So you mentioned that that's a large house for a farm of your scale. Tell us a little bit about the scale of Ignatius Farm.
Yeah, or the greenhouse itself isn't large, but it's just to even have a glass house, right? Like most people would just have a plastic hoop house.
Right.
So in terms of our scale, we have, it's always a funny thing to explain because we double or triplicate everything with cover crops in terms of our acreage. So in terms of our vegetable production, we're working within a 30-acre acreage, but we're actually cropping on average about 10 acres of that actively, up to 12 acres. So that's where how much active production space we have. And then we have as the center as a whole, it has about 250 acres of agricultural land, and we rent out land to other small farm businesses, so individuals that don't have their own farmland that we rent to. And those are also just really great folks to have here, and some of them are new and at what they're doing, and they're doing a lot of learning as they go, and some are more seasoned, but basically all of those folks are individuals that wouldn't, you know, through their family or otherwise have access to land and really appreciate that we can give them a longer term of tenancy than what is generally available in Ontario, because most land rentals in Ontario are on an annual basis because they're up for spec because land prices are so high. Which is a reason that farmers don't have the land. New farmers don't have the land. So it feels like a really great opportunity to be able to offer that, especially so close to a great market like Guelph and, well, a great community to live in. So I have 2 full-time farmers that work with me, and they live in Guelph, and so do I, but we can be farming all day. And that's what our tenants do too. And then the third piece in terms of acreage that gets used is that we have our community gardens. And the community gardens are, again, possible because we're so close to the city. And people that want more than a little postage stamp of what you can get through the community gardens in the city or want to be in a more agricultural setting will rent a plot from us, and it goes from 100 square foot to, I have one woman that rents 4,000 square feet, and it's her own for her own family's production. And then we have a number of organizations and schools that are doing synergistic kind of work where their agriculture program, they situate it here and do their programming on site. So that's just an example of like how amazing it is to be in a center that wants to offer the space, but knows that we can't do all of those things as our own activities. So we make the space available for folks that want to do synergistic kind of things. So there's a couple of examples of that, which would be there's a local high school that has an agricultural program, and they have a greenhouse at their school that they use, and some sort of raised beds as well. But in terms of their larger plot, they have that here with us. There's also a horticultural therapy program that rents out space in the original Jesuit school building, which is called Orchard Park. And they rent out space there for their programming, but they rent an annual and a perennial garden plot, quite a large annual garden plot from us every year. So, and then there's an outdoor preschool. The Guelph Outdoor Preschool has rent space in that Orchard Park building as well. And basically, the center is the landscape for their for their outdoor activities, right? So, and the garden is one of those. So most of those entities are renting between 3,000 to 4,000 square feet that they use specifically for their programming with their participants, which are young children, high school age, at-risk youth, and anybody else in society, you know. So so it's the community gardens are just a beautiful patchwork of of wonderful growing. I love them.
It's really cool. So are you, now I know obviously you're not the one who's actually out there doing the work from a management perspective, but are you the person who's in charge of going, okay, we're going to rent the orchard to this person, and we're going to rent cropland to this person, and we're going to set these folks up at the community gardens? Or do you have somebody else or a larger structure that you're working within? That role is me in terms of, so I'm the farm manager for the center, which means that I oversee all of those different programs, but, and for the community gardens, like I have one seasonal person that I'll hire on contract a year to help me with the setup and takedown of that. And then I have two full-time farmers, and one of those folks will do the tractor prep work, for that. But, but in terms of all the organizational side of it, the HR side of the farm, and the who rents land from us, and those facilitating those relationships and any of the issues that are associated with them, that's me. And then in terms of the actual production, like our vegetable production side, I'm outside of that, but I am one of the most seasoned equipment operators here too. So when we are short-staffed, then I'm the person that has to get on the tractor if necessary. I usually say if I've done my job really well and I've done the hiring well, and we're in there's no major sort of seasonal or HR issues because somebody has a family incident or whatever it is, then everybody is well set up in July, and I can actually take a week off. But my busy season is it basically is starting now and goes whole hog until July. Really just working on that planning and putting all of the puzzle pieces together.
All of the pieces in place. Yeah. So it's busy and it's fun and I work with amazing people.
Okay, so tell me about that. You said you hire you said two farmers, and you said you work with amazing people. Tell me a little bit about how you have things structured in that way.
Yeah, sure. So Mike Smith and Donald Boyer, they've been with me since as the trio that we are. We've been together since 2011. And so this structure basically is since then, I guess you could say, that we have those guys working with me year round. And then we always hire 3 to 6 interns that are coming to learn about organic agriculture. So we have a Wednesday program that they're part of in terms of their educational formal training, and then they work on the farm as well, up to 40 hours a week, and it's between the Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and occasional weekend stuff. So the interns are a core part of the farm, and then there's contract folks that I'll hire, and depending on the year, that varies. So this past year, we had a really big staff, and we also hired a few summer students. So there were like 12 of us, right? Wow. Which was amazing, right? Especially in a drought year where you've basically got one of those people that's doing irrigation like every hour that they're here.
Right.
So it was very valuable, and some of that contract work I solicit funding for, so that we can do some new things and also do some things that don't pay, like running educational programs.
Right.
In terms of that we believe very strongly that our internship program needs to offer not just work experience, but the theory behind it, that when interns come for training, that if they have a question, there should be time to answer the question. But when you train new people every year, it's not financially lucrative. So it does help to have the funding to be able to basically have people that have more experience than the interns work alongside them. Because if you've only got 2 full-time people, they're split in many, many directions. So if you can sort of have one person that's focused on irrigation and one person that's focused on making sure that the harvest management is going properly. And so we have this year we're able to divide that up in terms of somebody focused on irrigation, somebody focused on sort of field mentorship, and somebody focused on the harvest and post-harvest handling. And that was sort of split between 2 people and the markets. So so it just allows the interns to actually come in at whatever level they're at, and they can jump in if they're at a higher level to more capacity, but to also make sure that they really get trained in our systems and they understand why we use the systems that we use. So
I think it's really important what you just said about making sure that you have that time to answer the questions. That's really hard to do when the pressure's on from a production standpoint.
It is very hard to do, and I would say that we are particularly privileged in a certain way to be part of an organization where education is part of their mandate, right? And so if we were just a production farm, it wouldn't be, there has to be a broader reason for why we're doing what we're doing here at the Ignatius Jesuit Centre, right? So to produce 5,000 pounds of carrots is not the bottom line goal. But if we're investing in the training and mentorship of new farmers and new advocates for ecological agriculture, that's a different thing, right?
So I'm really interested in this because you talked about you're part of a Catholic institution, but most of the people there aren't Catholic, and particularly being part of a Jesuit institution. I mean, that's intriguing
Yeah.
to me. That there is this larger
Yeah.
mission that you're
Yeah.
fitting into, and I wonder. I'm trying to think of the right question to ask, so I'm just going to throw that out there and ask you to talk about it a little bit.
There's lots to say about it. So I would say that Ignatius Farm as an entity and Ignatius Farm CSA, Ignatius Farm CSA used to be a little bit more hands-off from the organization as a whole. They were always had this sort of side by side and understanding that they were important to each other, but not really explicitly. So where the organization is at right now is very strong in terms of that relationship. And I've been here since 2001. I was hired as a CSA farmer and had that role for 10 years. And during the early days of that, the organization as a whole and the Jesuits were working through a lot of sort of reimagining what they were and who they were on this land. And we had an individual who hired me, but eventually became to be the executive director, which in our structure is always a Jesuit, and who had an agricultural background, but was very strong on the social justice side of what the Jesuits have always been interested in, was interested in the education piece, but really saw the whole social justice piece for the Jesuits with this particular land base to be an ecological justice issue and to be an issue like to really look seriously at rural issues, and was quite a visionary. So even though the CSA's relationship with the organization as a whole wasn't I guess pinned down as structurally as it could have been, it created this opportunity to start something here. I mean, he initiated it, but to get it going, and then we had this very interesting ability to sort of act like what the organization wanted to be, even when it couldn't fully articulate it and had the capacity to do it itself. So that when the organization and the Jesuits as a whole were ready, the farm itself was already at production capacity and already had educational programming going on, that they could say, yes, this is really part of our vision and mission statement. So it's an uncommon opportunity to be able to work with an organization that really gets the farm piece and that you can really be a part of it. Because sometimes we try and match up a farm with an organization or like a community garden or whatever it is, but we try and match it up with an organization that doesn't really get food security or rural issues, and you have to really work on it so that you are an active member of that community that is that organization. It doesn't just happen by chance, and you have to really see how you are part of that organization, or you'll always be sort of side by side and working a little bit at odds with each other. So finding the language that, even if it's not food security or urban-rural divide or whatever it is, find the language that host organization really understands. And if you can use that language together, it really makes a big impact, because the farm on its own had set up its own, when it was just the CSA, we had our set of guiding principles, and we'd set up, like when we did our holistic management training, we did our holistic goal and whatnot. And eventually we decided, actually, all of those things are just encompassed in the program objectives of the Ignatius Jesuit Centre. Let's just broadcast those. And it's interesting because I think that historically people didn't want to have, like they felt like, well, we don't want to have too much association with Loyola House because that's Catholic, or that's that other entity. But realizing that doesn't really matter. Actually, we're still part of the same organization, and even though there's different focus, we can actually be working really well together. And although your marketing may be branded, like the farm has its own Facebook page because not everybody wants to hear about Loyola House Retreat House or Loyola House retreats. It's a different audience in a way, but at the same time, not discounting that the audiences have something to offer each other, and that's an important relationship to be aware of, and to be able to see when you're working in the organization how you service each other, and then also that marketing is part of that, and how you market has some different angles, even if it's a together entity. So.
That language piece is something they talk about a lot in holistic management when you get outside of just the little bit about farm management, but in the broader context of applying those holistic resource management tools to other wholes is the language that they would use about that. But really trying to get clear on what are the things that bind us together. And language is such an important part of that. And I mean, we could talk about that ad infinitum here in November of 2016, but that language piece, I think, is just so critical.
Yeah, it's something I've learned a lot about over over my time here. You know what I'll do? I actually brought I have with me our vision and mission statement, but I think the piece that is probably most interesting to other farmers is the program objectives, which are part of that, which says the Ignatius Jesuit Centre is dedicated to providing programs that foster an ecological way of life for the healing of the world. So most ecological farmers know how they fit into that. Nurture a deeper spirituality in people, leading to inner freedom. So this piece is in the organization looks a lot like what happens at Loyola House in terms of the spiritual direction that's provided there and the retreats and whatnot. But all the farmers know that when they're working on the land, that leads to a deeper spirituality in people, right? So, and the spiritual directors know that the land base that everybody walks on in silence here it's so critical for their spiritual journey while they're on retreat here, right? And then a very specific one in terms of program objectives is to promote the production of local sustainable food. And we feel that it's actually important to be a functional example of that and not just be talking about it. So it's important to be an operating farm as well as an educational farm. And then the fourth program objective is provide a welcoming space for individual and communal discernment and education. And that is this space is amazing that way because it has this, people come here because of the farm, maybe because they have a CSA membership, maybe because they have a community garden, or just to walk the trails, or, to help, with some of the naturalization work that's happening with the Old Growth Forest Project. They work on these different areas, but it's just this welcoming space where they can find their peace, right? So yeah, it's just a beautiful opportunity to offer this landscape that any farmer knows what healing that offers to them. and so we want to be able to offer that very, very clearly. Being part of a Catholic and a Jesuit organization is interesting, especially now because we have a Jesuit Pope. And in Jesuit, with Jesuits in the world, there are only three locations where they're doing active agricultural work, and there's only one in North America, and it's us, right? So
wow.
it's amazing. It's easy to forget that for us in this space because we're just doing our work, right? But there's not very many places like this where a place of spirituality that is so, even though it's the retreat activities are like they are Ignatian, right? They follow the Ignatian spiritual exercises, and it's Jesuit, right? That's what it is. But the space is open to everybody, right? And an example of that also with the Loyola House is that the retreat center, when we're not doing our programming, it gets used by other synergistic folks. Next month there's a group of Buddhists coming, right? So,
really?
So it's not, and that's why I say you don't have to be Catholic to participate in what is going on here, because most people, when they find, a place that is, offering that peacefulness and that openness, they recognize it as good, right? And so with the farm, what we want to do is be able to bring that together in a very practical thing, which is like we all eat, right? And shouldn't the way that we grow our food and the way that we give opportunity to those who don't grow food to participate in it be something that is really nourishing? Because it feeds us, but it should be nourishing for us on all levels. And so it's just amazing to be part of an organization that can think that broadly. And then when I also say there's a Jesuit Pope now who's very interested in, being interested in supporting those that work on ecological issues and work with the poor. Like, he's quite explicit about that now, Jesuits are all talking about the Ignatius Jesuit Centre in Guelph and what they're doing. It's very interesting. We have
That's pretty cool.
some extra support for things that we were doing that was not as explicit before, I guess. In Catholic circles, like the Catholic circles always really strongly supported Loyola House, but the farm itself is getting support that's more active in ways that it didn't have before. And just being part of that conversation is really important. So it gives us other opportunities in the community. And it's sort of interesting because, I didn't grow up Catholic, so I didn't realize how big of a community that is, right? But it is a big community, and so it's important for us as farmers to be part of that, to be able to speak to it in ways that actually engage as many people as possible with the land and with their food. So we have some unique opportunities here. It's a pretty darn amazing place, and it's taken many years. Like I said, I've been here since 2001, and organizationally, it's taken a bunch of patience, I would say, to work through the stages of that. And sometimes it was just, I know what I need to do on the farm, and they'll figure it out, structural stuff. And you have so much to do on the farm that you just do it. And then you breathe during the winter and go, let's change this and this and that. And you give your input, and then you put your head down again.
And you said that you started there in 2001, and that's also the year the CSA started.
Yeah, so I was hired as a CSA farmer. So, and I was the only staff person for that. I had two fellows that worked with me part-time that summer to do 3 acres. It was nutty.
So you've really grown from being kind of an on the ground, getting things started with the production, moved through that to kind of this more of a, you said you're a farm manager, but almost like the farm director. It actually sounds like to me would be that'd be the job title I'd slap on you. So talk to me about how that progressed. You started again, 2001, you said 3 acres, and it was kind of crazy.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy, and out of that, I have a phrase that I've told all of my interns and all of my staff every year, especially in September, or actually more precisely, starting in the third week of August and through September, is you can only run 1 year on adrenaline, and after that you have to change your system.
Great.
Because like the second year in the third week of August, I'm like, I'm spent. I can't do this anymore. So let me say what made it work and why I stuck is maybe a good way to look at that. Is that when I came, I had minimal tractor experience. I'd done the program at UC Davis for 2 months. I'd worked on a bunch of different farms. I'd worked in research and in Florida and at Cornell and at Cornell University, and I'd worked on a bunch of farms in Ontario, but I hadn't run my own show before I started here. And so you do run that first year on adrenaline because, like, we sold out of the CSA, right? Because of that Catholic community. We'd planned for 50 regular shares, and everybody got a small share. So there were 87 families that were expecting food from me in that first year.
That's a lot in year one.
That's a lot of accountability, right? And so, I mean, I overcropped everything, of course, and everybody, which in like now that we do cost analysis, I know how much free food they got. And that I should have been paying 2 of me. But in any case, what allowed me to do that was not just adrenaline. It was that I had, when I came here, there were 2 other farmers that were on staff here because there was livestock. And the preceding formulation of the farm was that there was what was called the Ignatius Farm community. And it was a L'Arche modeled community, which is a Christian community where folks with disabilities, usually like developmental delays or those kinds of disabilities, are living in community with their caregivers. And the premise is that usually the caregivers are the primary beneficiaries of the relationship. Like the people with the obvious disabilities have a lot to offer us. So this had been operating for about 25 years and had to close for financial reasons and aging Jesuits. They were concerned that, they didn't want the Jesuit that was in charge to just not be able to be replaced. And so they were closing that in 2001. But in conjunction with that, there had been these conversations going on with people affiliated with the farm community with something called the Jesuit Farm Project, which was basically people talking a lot about the ecological farming, climate change, all kinds of like woes to agriculture. What are we going to? We should start a CSA. We should do this. But that was going on in the 90s, right? And at least in Canada, there were very few CSAs at the time. Everything was in its infancy in terms of organic agriculture. It was happening, but it was a lot of ad hoc kind of stuff going on. There'd been people that have been doing it since the 60s and 70s. But anyways, so the Jesuit Farm Project was talking a lot, and when the farm community closed, amongst a few Jesuits and the surrounding community, people were really concerned, like, oh, maybe they're going to sell that land. Like, we have to make sure that is still there's still community and there's still agriculture happening on that land. So that's when the CSA was launched, or was initiated, by people that had no experience with CSA, and they just hired me to do it, and they solicited members. So it was such a fascinating time because there was this mourning period going on about the farm community, and I sort of caught the last 3 months of that when I was hired, which was beautiful for me to actually be able to see what the context was that was kind of getting laid for me, right? And why that CSA sold out immediately, right?
Right.
And to be able to participate in some of those events so that I knew, this isn't just me starting my CSA. There's a whole other context of what this place is about and what it wants to be about. Just even having the window of that for 3 months was huge for me in terms of being able to see what the potential of this place was, but also what was going on here that was already so good, and let's make use of that. And even though they're moving on from something that, was good, but also had difficulties, so there's that background. And when the farm community had to close, so they had one farmer that was hired that had been working with them to sort of support their work, who is an amazing fellow who I continue to hire him on an occasional basis here. He was like an old farmer, grew up on a farm, not a lot of additional education, but that man can tell you exactly how long it's going to take to do a tractor operation in a field, and he's within like 3 minutes, including setup and takedown of the plow and the disc and that guy is like, he was not a manager in terms of the director kind of thing, like stuff that I'm doing, but in terms of field crops and taking care of the orchards, like he was meticulous. And so he was there, and he brought on for a time another farmer to work with him who he'd worked with before, to manage the livestock until the board made the decision that we couldn't afford to have two farmers managing livestock. That it's just, unless it's your own business, you can't hire people to do livestock, right? Like they're working all night and it's nutty. Right.
It's very difficult.
Yeah. So the organization as a whole moved away from that. But when I came on, there were these two guys that believed that the CSA was part of the future of this place, and they saw enough potential in me for being an operator as well as a horticulturalist to be able to. So, like they trained me on all of the different operations in those first 2 years. That they were like, we're going to do the tractor equipment stuff for your first year, like in terms of prepping the soil, and we're going to start training you now, so that next year you're doing it, and the following year you're setting up the plow, and So I had this amazing mentorship that was built into working here in terms of the production skills. And fortunately, because of my sort of other experience and innate sort of perfectionism, I guess, is that that I had experience using spreadsheets to do the business side of things. I had enough ability and frugalness that I wanted to keep track of our finances and numbers, and I had enough of the experience on from growing up. Even though I didn't grow up on a farm, I had my own garden since I was 10, so I had enough of years of observing that I could do the horticultural work, even though I was sure that I had that first year, I'm can I really do this? I've only worked for somebody else, But so that coupled with having these two guys there is what made for that success, I would say, of this farm, because if I didn't have those guys and a certain level of stubbornness that this is going to keep on going,
right.
that it wouldn't have happened, I don't think. So, and then in terms of getting back to your question about like how does it move like from, starting as the CSA farmer to the structure that we have now, is that in that first year, I knew that I had wanted to set up, and I had said that in my interview, I'd like to set up an internship program because I feel like there's a need for that in Southern Ontario, and I feel like what's happening with internships in Southern Ontario needs more structure because like it just isn't there, and people can go to an internship and completely not get what they were hoping for. And so, and I would say that I've worked on farms where that was, I got a great experience because I already had pre-existing knowledge that I could ask all the questions that I got a lot out of my internships. But the folks that came in without any of that background that I already had didn't get,
right,
because they didn't know what to ask. And so they just didn't get stuff out of it, right? So for the very novice city folks that are interested in an agricultural internship, they're isolated. There were all these conditions to make up, an internship could be completely hit or miss. So when I was interviewed for this, I said, I want to set up an educational program that's part of that. Like at this stage, I did not know how many different things I didn't know about in terms of just even setting up a business, let alone setting up an agricultural program and how none of these things make money.
Right.
So, but I had a good friend who was doing her master's that was really interested in working on this internship issue with me, and she went to visit the craft program in Massachusetts. Her name was Jacinta Fairholm, and basically she made her master's program with me, helping me develop my internship and program in terms of actually turning it into a program, and writing a manual, like the first draft of the manual that we still provide to our interns every year. She, her draft of that was her master's
very cool
project. So she asked me what can I do for my master's that could be work on the ground for your farm, and I said, I want a manual and help me build this structure. And she did it, and it was amazing, and we're still building on that. So I also had this other amazing woman that was basically volunteering for me, by doing her master's, and that was another huge gift. And so what I would say out of that is that I think I'm just able to identify people that will be of good service to me.
Well, and I think that's hugely important when you're growing a business and or growing any kind of an enterprise, is to be able to identify those people who are going to be able to help you move things towards the vision that you've got, right? I mean, that's that's what you do as an entrepreneur, because you can't do it all yourself.
No, you can't. And I guess that's why I say that, I work with amazing people, is that since then, probably the biggest skill that I've built, because I decided to run an internship, it means you're hiring every single year, right? Is that one of the biggest skills I've built is in hiring and in knowing how to select people that I want to work with and knowing when I've made it, or one of my staff, if they're doing hiring for interns now, when a decision needs to be adjusted, which is actually very rare. But it is, hiring has become one of the things that I feel is one of the most important pieces of my job, and it enables me to work with some really amazing people that either come in with lots to offer in terms of tangible skills or come in with lots to offer in terms of ability to learn those skills. So
I want to dig more into that, how you actually do your hiring, because I think this is one of the biggest challenges that we face when we're scaling up our farming operations. But before we do that, I want to take a break here, get a word from our sponsors, and then we're going to be right back with Heather Lekx from Ignatius Farms in Guelph, Ontario. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is made possible with the generous support of Vermont Compost Company, makers of Fort B and Fort Light potting mixes for certified organic transplant production. And while it may seem early to be thinking about next year's greenhouse season, you don't want to miss participating in Vermont Compost Company's fall pre-buy program. When you order Vermont compost potting soil for next year's growing season, you can save significantly on the finest potting soil that I personally have ever used. There are many great options for significant savings. Vermont Compost Company organizes shared truckload weeks, where they organize and group orders by state or region. When you place your order to ship on one of these shared truckloads, they offer discounts on the purchase of your potting soil. Plus, they consolidate the orders, so growers also save on shipping fees. If you want to get the best possible deal on Vermont compost potting soil, order a full truckload. This is what we used to do on my farm. If you don't need a full truckload yourself, get together with your farming friends and neighbors and order a full truckload together. This option offers the best possible price per sling bag or pallet and the best possible shipping rate. It's also the best option for growers who are a great distance away from Vermont. Growers who pre-buy full truckloads often end up paying a price for their sling bags that is lower than what growers pay for a sling bag picked up in Vermont. The fall pre-buy program runs September 21st through December 21st. For more information, visit the website, vermontcompost.com. Bandwidth for the show is provided by BCS America. BCS two-wheel tractors are often mistaken for just a rototiller, but it is truly a superior piece of farming equipment. Engineered and built in Italy, where small farms are a way of life, BCS tractors are built to standards of quality and durability expected of real agricultural equipment, the kind of dependability every farm needs. I've worked with BCS tractors for over 24 years, and I wouldn't consider anything else for my small tractor needs. And I'm not the only fan. More than 1.5 million people in 50 countries have discovered the advantages of owning Europe's most popular two-wheel tractor. And these really are small tractors with the kinds of features found on their four-wheel cousins and a wide array of equipment. Power harrows, rotary plows, flail mowers, snow throwers, sickle bar mowers, chippers, log splitters, and more. Check out bcsamerica.com to see photos and some really cool videos of BCS in action. bcsamerica.com. All right, and we're back with Heather Lekx from Ignatius Farms in Guelph, Ontario. Heather, before we took our break, you were talking about hiring, and you were saying something that you don't hear very often, that you're very good at hiring. So I'd like to have you dig into, how do you do being very good at hiring?
Sure. Okay, well, there's some very practical things that we do in terms of being good at hiring, and then there's also just having some good gut instinct to pay attention to during the hiring process. So the first thing is having a good process, and not overly complicated, but to be very clear with your advertising. And so first of all, advertise. And advertise with a good, simple ad, and then have a backup document, because everything has to be simple when you want to get it online and out in many places. So you have a short, very concise, so well-worded ad, and then a longer document, especially if you're offering internships. It's absolutely critical. And we consider internships hires. They're not volunteers, although many firms treat them that way. And that's not a comment either way, but I think that either way, you have to be very clear with your interns about what is the arrangement. And so we have an internship package, and anyone's welcome to look at it on our website. The internship package goes through all of the likely questions that somebody is going to ask you, or that they're more importantly, not going to think to ask you until the first week that they start working and realize they had imagined something different. So these are things in terms of the internship of exactly what the housing arrangement is, exactly how far it is to get to town, what the transportation opportunities are to town, what food is provided by the farm and what is not provided by the farm, what is the wage, whether it's paid weekly, semi-monthly, bi-weekly, what is the payment method, is the housing charged on top of that and then removed, because in Ontario that's a taxable deduction, so you get, if it's provided, you pay and then you move it, or do you just charge rent? Those kinds of things. So being very clear about those things that affect a person's personal life as well as their work life. So then the work life things are the hours, again, the wages. Are there deductions to those wages that are just usual taxes and things like that? Or so what is the gross wage, and is it a gross wage? And then if your taxes are going to be different because you made $1 million on another job, your taxes are going to be different than somebody else, so your deductions might be higher. You don't have to get into all of those details, but you do have to say it's taxable, So what we found is that an internship is just like a new worker. And a new worker or a young worker is the person who is most likely to get injured on a job, and is most likely not to know their rights, and is most likely to not ask all the questions that they need to know to actually be sure that this is the right job for them. So the more explicit you can be if you're working, especially with new and young workers, and if you're training people every year, the more likely you are to get people that are a good fit for your farm and the personality of your farm. So if there are certain things that are absolutely a no-go on your farm, like there's no smoking on the farm, put it right there. There's no smoking when you're working in the farm area. We don't want tobacco mosaic virus in our fields. What you do at your house is different. There's no smoking in the house, these kinds of things, right? So just to be really explicit about those, because if you have somebody that is an active smoker, they'd like to know that right away.
Well, I'm actually looking at the guide right now, and I love just how specific it is. Smoking's not permitted. I love this line. For the shareholders on CSA pickup days, we expect you to be helpful, warm, and have a clean shirt on. Talk about the kinds of things that, especially, young people with an idea of what a farm should be might not. I know that I certainly didn't get that when I started farming.
Yeah. Indeed. So, and I think the other thing is there's certain things that you can do with on-the-job training to reinforce what you've outlined in the package, because that package is long enough and we're redoing that package, so it'll look even better in another month, or more concise. But what you want to do is be able to lay the framework so that when you do that first week of orientation, which we consider that first week of when interns come to be, actually the first 2 weeks, we consider it entire orientation, is the productivity is not there. They're doing some work, but it really is training, right? And we have to be there 100%, and the full-time staff are exhausted at the end of those 2 weeks because they're still trying to do tractor work and everything else in between training everybody. But it does mean that those first 2 weeks go a lot smoother because you're not dealing with some of the questions that should have been known. The other thing is that at the end of that internship package, there's an application. It's very simple. It basically tells people, we want you to send us a cover letter, which says why you want this job, right? I mean, specifically why you're interested in organic agriculture, right? And we want you to, give, there's a few little sort of things like which internship are you hiring for in terms of the timeline and things like that. So it's very simple, but what it does is it makes sure that people can follow some directions. They got to the end of the package, so they actually have some patience to get through a task, and that they've probably, by the way they answer those questions, we can tell if they've read the rest of it. Because they'll use some of the words that we want them to use.
Right.
Now, that might not mean that they make a great intern, but it means that at least they can get through the first stage of things. So that shows us that they're keen. And that they've read it enough to know that it's a modest stipend, and whatnot. So what that has done is that's actually reduced the number of applications that we've gotten. But it's increased the percentage of applications we're interested in looking at, which saves us a lot of time. So that's just sort of the practical side of things. And then when we get those applications, we vet them. So there's one person that isn't even involved in the interview process or whatnot, but she just looks at them and sees, did they follow the instructions?
Nice.
And if they didn't, then I don't see those resumes, or if it looks like it was like a minor error or something, she'll contact them and say, we see that you didn't, something was missed. Do you wish to complete the application? And if we actually hear from them, then we take it.
Right.
So in any case, so that sort of just does a pre-filter, and then when we look at those resumes, we're looking at sort of a filtered group already, so that saves us. And then we actually do an interview process for our interns. I know that some farms don't actually, and it might just be comfort level, but they might not actually go through a formal interview process. The formal part of an interview doesn't actually have to be that long, but if it has a little bit of formality to it, so it sounds like a question and answer, and we try and get everybody to come to the farm for their interview. It's not physically possible for everybody to do that, and so we might have to do an interview by the phone. But our preference is to prioritize folks that actually make the initiative to come to the farm for an interview, because then they've seen their housing situation and we can gauge their body language a little bit better. We try and Skype interview over just a phone interview, or at least, even if the Skype isn't working too well, to do that for the first part, so that we can see what did they dress like for this interview, even though they're far away. Did they what's their body language in terms of are they actually looking at trying to look at us on the screen, even if it's a screen, or so are they trying to make eye contact, so simple things like that, and always having two people present for an interview, because and two people that are kind of different, right? But both are working with the farm and know both the logistics side and the big picture side. So for our interns, that's usually our my two farmers do the intern hires, and then for our contract folks, it's usually me and one of the other farmers, depending on what the job focus is. So always having two people, and it's just to make sure that there's a good, sometimes somebody will pick up something like, did you notice that when we asked them that, they sort of they had that, like, this look in their eyes, you know? You're like, oh, so it helps you to ask follow-up questions. And I feel like I'm going on a long tangent here on this, but maybe just also to say that it's important to have a script of questions that you're going to ask, but to not hesitate to ask additional questions, because sometimes that'll give you more insight into what the person is about. And also to have a question, usually at the end, once they've warmed up a little bit, that helps to learn something completely different about them. So, like, ask them what their, like, best superpower would be, or ask them, like, if they could describe themselves, if they had to do a poster presentation of themselves, what would be on the poster? Or if they had to describe themselves as a piece of art, or as an installation of something. Get them to describe themselves in a different way, in a non-usual interview question. So it's just so that you can, like, see how you relate to the person, or what kind of quirky thing you can find out about them, So yeah, that was, so maybe then the follow-up is that really good, important orientation. And in Ontario labor law, the first 3 months of a contract is probationary. We are always more generous than Ontario labor laws for our farm workers, and for, like, what kind of sick days and those kinds of things that we offer. But it is important for farms to know what their local labor laws are and how they fit into them, because lots of people that are doing internships actually just don't know that they're doing something illegal. So it's important to do that investigation. I'm lucky enough to be part of a larger organization that has some supports in terms of, like, that there's an HR consultant that I can ask questions to. So I'm fortunate that way, although we did not have that capacity when I started. That's been sort of the last 5 years, which have been really helpful.
Yeah. Well,
so
and I think,
we
again,
did that all on our own.
not unusual to move from being fairly informal in your hiring arrangements to firming everything up and becoming more legitimate over time, because you have the resources now that you can dedicate towards that, now that the farm is kind of running itself. I say running itself with finger quotes around it, but you didn't see that. So you said that orientation process is really important. And I mean, you talked about what that experience was like for your farmers. What do you do with the orientation process? Is it a formal orientation and onboarding sequence that you go through, or is it really just kind of getting people started with the work and that's the extent of it?
Yeah, so it's formal in the sense that there are components that we always include, and it's like the first 2 weeks are very scheduled, because we want to not miss out on those pieces, right? So there's, like the first day, it is like orientation to what your job is. So it's going through in more detail what was in that internship package, or if it's a contract, like there's a different, like it's going through the job description. It's signing paperwork, it's reading the HR manual, like some kind of boring stuff. But it's also a walking tour of the farm, and it's the first greenhouse orientation, right? So there's some kind of work operation happening in the greenhouse that they have some training on. So it depends on what's happening, like a little bit on the weather, but also the planting schedule. And then, so I'll just list off what's included in those first couple weeks. There's health and safety training, and health and safety, like sort of general stuff for the farm. And then there's and how our standard operating procedures work, how health and safety just works in a workplace and how the farm fits into that like context. And again, that's going back to like we're very open, right? Like I do the health and safety training, and we're in an organization that has over 20 employees, which in Ontario means you have a joint health and safety committee, and I'm the manager co-chair for that committee. So I know this stuff like way too deeply, but it's really great for the farm because both in terms of the farm business, in terms of I understand the legislation, so I know the liability side of things, but I also know because I've operated all of that equipment too. I know the health and safety risks, and I know what needs to be in place for those things to happen safely. So I'm right clear with folks in the get-go, especially interns or like anybody that's under 22. I assume that they haven't had good health and safety training. Actually, lots of people like that have worked in small businesses haven't had good health and safety training. So I'm very clear with folks from the get-go. Like I said before, you are the most likely person to get injured here. So we are going to do everything that we can to make sure that that doesn't happen, and you are going to do everything you can to make sure that doesn't happen. And here are the things that I think you need to know. If there's something you think I need to know, you're going to tell me. And you're going to tell your immediate supervisor who's working with you, So like just simple like health and safety communications from the get-go so that people know that if something is hazardous or they don't feel comfortable, maybe they actually didn't get all the training they needed, right? Like we can rectify that. So the health and safety is a big part of orientation, and then the tractor training is a really that's sort of the biggest one in terms of that they all get the opportunity to drive the tractor once, and after that it's based on aptitude, and so they all get that first training because they need to know about safety around tractors anyways. And then we go through based on, if somebody's really scattered, they're not a tractor driver. So there's those pieces of the orientation, and then there's clear pieces in terms of production knowledge. There's pieces about how the education program works here. There's food safety training. There's their first field trip. Our education program with our interns, they all fill out a learning objectives form, and then we meet with each of them to go through it to say this is how these different learning objectives can be met. This one is actually not happening at this farm. Is this okay? We can give you some recommendations, but it's not going to happen because we don't have livestock or whatever it is, But we plan field trips and workshops every Wednesday according to the learning objectives. So, we have a roster of different places that we can take the interns to or bring folks in to discuss different things. So we select from that suite or find new ones based on the learning objectives. So going through the learning objectives is part of that orientation, and then also the first two sort of field trips are already, usually the first month is scheduled before they do their learning objectives, and we can apply them because you have to plan your first month. But so that includes things like introduction to soils, introduction to botany on the farm, which ties into what I was saying about the greenhouse, right? You can do a bunch of that training by looking at a lot of the seedlings, and anyways, so we do those things, and we usually plan those first field trips, and one of them is usually to Toronto, actually, because you can go to the Toronto Food Terminal, which is like a big distribution hub for wholesaling produce in Ontario, and then we take them to some of the urban ag stuff really interesting stuff that's going on in Toronto, and then we do a much more rural field trip, and it's usually the first craft day, which is the Collaborative Regional Alliance for Farmer Training. We set up, Jacinda Fairholm, who I mentioned before, she and I set up that network for Ontario, and so the farms, along with some amazing farmers, all the farms that we knew that had interns at the time, we solicited and got together, and so that program is active and ongoing. We're now the Southern Ontario arm. But anyway, so the first craft field day is within that first month. Those are monthly gatherings, and then we supplement those monthly craft field trips with our own programming. So that's all, like in that orientation, they're getting all of those different, they're getting introduced to all of those different concepts, those people, those places, so that they have a really good grounding and understand the big picture that they're part of, so that when they're doing all of that minutia, they understand how, like, nobody wants to just weed, right? That's not a full internship, right? They want to learn the bigger concepts. They want to know the importance and value of what they're doing and why they're doing what they're doing. So, why is it important to weed?
And especially if you think about what an internship is. I mean, by definition, it's designed to train somebody to be a farmer, and understanding the whys and the whens is probably more important than understanding how to get down on your hands and knees and pull out that little pigweed.
Exactly. So the other maybe compliment that I'll say to that in terms of the internship is, like, during the growing season, there's weekly programming, and then there's which is complemented by mentored field walks and like in addition to the workshops and field trips, so that like they'll do a field walk of our farm and what's happening with one of our staff, and then the end of the growing season is when we do sort of the debrief, the deorientation, I guess, which is where we do, like, we get down to the nitty-gritty of, this is how our business operates. You've seen it on the production side and the conceptual side. Now here is our budget.
Here's the spreadsheets.
Here's all and they've been working with, like, the planting schedules and transplanting schedules and all of that, and they've been doing their labor records for the cost of production every day, but the actual, like, how does it all come together? Like, they do the crop plan debrief with our farmers, where we talk through every crop. How did it go? Was that an anomaly for this year, or is that normal for us? What were our favorite varieties? So we debrief everything with them. And then we do a crop planning workshop with them, where they actually do, like, they design a little crop plan, and including rotations and whatnot, the budgeting and financing, business, like, next steps kind of, there's a couple of those workshops, and then some debriefing activities, and like the last week we do this year we did like a campfire and like roasted a whole bunch of vegetables, and people's kids and family came and stuff like that. So just like doing things and sort of reflection exercises. So things like, one that we did this last week, because they just finished last week, so it's all fresh, is just everybody writing on a paper for each person things that they appreciated and learned from the other person.
Very cool.
It's just a way of sort of like rounding things out, everybody leaving on really strong note. And then the other thing that we've been able to do is sometimes we've been able to offer subsidies to for those that are interested to the Ecological Farmers. Ecological Farmers of Ontario has an annual conference every year now in November, or beginning of December. And so, we can contribute towards if any of them are interested in going to that, because that's more an opportunity to go to a conference that's not just at the novice level. It's sort of like could be their first foray into that, and helps with their networking and stuff.
That sounds like a really great program, Heather.
I'm pretty proud of it. It's, we feel like we've put a lot of work into it, and have had some really amazing people work with us through it. Work with great people.
So when we were talking before the show, we were discussing your CSA, which has up until now always been run as an on-farm pickup. But you said you're making some changes to that program. So can you kind of give us some numbers for your CSA program, and tell us how you do the marketing and how you're doing the distribution now?
So we have gone as large as 250 shares, regular size shares, and so, or 250 households, I guess you could say. And those numbers about 3 years ago dropped dramatically. And part of this, we think, was due to the general availability of organic produce in grocery stores that was getting to be like more than just a few crops, but also that so as I said earlier, we initiated the Craft Ontario program with these other wonderful farms in our region, and that through both ourselves and these other farms, there have been some great farmers that have started their own businesses, and Guelph is known to have people that are interested in organic farming, and they love supporting the new farmer, and so we were no longer the new farm.
Right.
And those farms were actually delivering to mostly downtown-ish neighborhoods, which is where the concentration of interest was. So we had to up our game, which is fantastic, right? Like, if you can't up your game compared to people you've trained, then there's a problem. But it was a really important opportunity for reflection for us in terms of what the market was, and also what our particular niche was, and knowing that our niche was bringing folks to the farm. And we had, up until that point, always said, we don't want to actually go to Guelph. We want to leave that open for our other farm colleagues who aren't immediately adjacent to the city and don't have that advantage. But it just felt like we don't need to go to the Guelph Farmers Market because we're 4 kilometers away.
Right. It's easy for that market to come to you.
Yeah, so let's just make that available to those other farms. We didn't feel like we wanted to create that competition with our colleagues. But I think it helped us realize that, there's lots of other neighborhoods in Guelph that aren't downtown, and people that aren't going to the farmers market, that would be interested in having our produce, and having a relationship with the farm. But there's also this situation where not everybody, even if they love coming to the farm, has the capacity to come to the farm every week, or can commit to 18 weeks of shares. And we had already started a winter share that we were doing, so we had this summer share and winter share model. So 3 years ago, we decided to divide up our share even further, so that our traditional summer share can be purchased as an early, mid, or late summer share. So it's a 5-week, the early and mid portions are 5-week portions, and then the late summer share is the fall. It's September and October. And that was really interesting because that, coupled with last year starting to go to new neighborhoods, we were back up to the same numbers of households. There were around 250 households this year. We were sold out on all of our share segments, and according to what we cropped, but we had also added a farmer's market, and for a portion of the season, 2 farmers market until that drought hit.
Right.
But in any case, we had, so we were selling everything that we had cropped, and the previous year we had not. So we were really happy about that, and realizing that we had pinpointed 2 things. One is that even if people want to come to the farm every week, they may choose not to buy a CSA share because they go away for 3 weeks in August, and it no longer feels like a financially good decision for their household. Or they are, like, even if they love doing it, they've got 3 kids, and it's just another thing to do every single week. and if it's not in their neighborhood already, they're not going to do it. The other thing that we discovered is that by marketing in these different locations, we had more uptake for the farm pickup because people were they saw us in another place and they realized, oh, well, it's cheaper if I go to the farm. I'm just going to go to the farm. So it had this auxiliary sort of marketing benefit of having these other locations in the media. And I also had, because it was a new initiative, I was able to solicit some funding for this so I could have a person working on outreach. So suddenly, like this year, we've actually had a much more active sort of Facebook, and I mean, we were trying to do it, but like Don and Mike and I have loads on our plate, right? So it wasn't always happening. So just having Sarah work on that stuff as well as, build these relationships with the different drop sites and work on the social media side of things, it made a huge difference in terms of people finding us. And so we knew that was a weak link for us. I'm using holistic management terminology here, but we knew
right ahead. We're friendly with that.
But we knew that the media side of things was a weak link for us, and that we wanted to work on it. But we also knew that unless we had some sort of we had some capacity for somebody to work on that as well as something else, it wasn't going to happen. So that was a huge benefit, and we're hoping that we can have somebody doing that at least on a part-time basis in the future. So.
And I think
that's
definitely
for us in terms of that marketing stuff, or learnings that we knew but we couldn't implement before. So.
Right. That it simply does take time. And I think it's really easy to discount it as playing around on Facebook. But, that marketing effort, and to do a good job with it, not just to be throwing some random stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, but to really be focused and attentive to it, does take some time and some different tools.
And a good person. Again.
All right, Heather, with that, we're going to turn to our lightning round. So what's your favorite tool on the farm?
2 favorite tools: Excel spreadsheets.
Okay.
Actually, 3 favorite tools. 3. People, I've said so many times, my people are my best assets here. And then my third one, just because it's just so fun to say, is that for about 8 years, we consistently used a very tiny tractor I bought off of my uncle, who was in vegetable production, called the Friday Power Hoe. And it looks like a go-kart, and you steer it with your feet so that you can use these wiggle hoes with your hands and get like really close into your crops. And I totally love that thing. We don't use it anymore because we've scaled up enough that we needed something bigger. But if you look up Friday Power Hoe, you'll find hardly any of them online because they've been discontinued, but they're so fun.
That sounds like a very cool tool. In fact, I mean, this I'm already planning my trip to Guelph next summer just so that maybe I can see it and convince you to let me play with it.
Excellent.
All right. And just because you use this as an interview question, if you had to describe yourself as a piece of art, what would you say? You
know what? Nobody has ever asked me. That is great. That is awesome. If I had to describe myself as a piece of art, you know what? It would, one time I went on a retreat and I had to, we had to actually make an icon of ourselves. It was so interesting, and then use it to introduce ourselves. And it was such a great activity. And in it, I had put a Celtic cross because I have a very earthy spirituality. And I had used this like green, it was some kind of paper that was really textured anyways, and made it into vines all the way around it. And so just being emblematic of that there always has to be like lots of plants around me. and like a blue background. I always need lots of light. I guess I'm a plant maybe. So probably something that has like I would probably that particular activity had like lots of different papers, but I would probably use something more like wool yarn or some like a natural fiber in there. So it would be like halfway fiber art, paper, maybe some watercolor, and lots of greens and blues and yellows.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. What's your favorite crop to grow?
Oh, you know what? If I was using the Friday Power Hoe, it's strawberries because I could weed them well. And I love eating strawberries. And when you have a good crop of strawberries, you can make a good amount of money for 3 weeks.
All right.
Which is exactly when I need it, when my fiscal year end comes.
And finally, if you could go back in time and tell your beginning farmer self one thing, what would it be?
Something that I received that I talked a little bit about, which I didn't know how much I needed, which is to work with a seasoned farmer for several years on something that I was planning. So to have that mentor, to learn the skills that I didn't know I was missing. Yeah, work with a seasoned farmer. Whether it's on their operation or on your own, but having that mentor, it's so huge.
Awesome. Heather, thank you so much for a great conversation today.
No problem. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for your great questions or leading statements.
All right. You have a wonderful rest of your day.
Okay. Thanks, Chris.
All right. So wrapping things up here, I'll say again that this is episode 94 of the Farmer to Farmer podcast, and you can find the notes for the show at farmertofarmerpodcast.com by looking on the episodes page or just searching for Lekx. That's Lekx. You can support the show by going to farmertofarmerpodcast.com/donate. I want to make the best farming podcast in the world, and you can help. Whether you're supporting the show on a monthly basis through Patreon or showing us your love by leaving us a review on iTunes or Stitcher, your support matters. Thank you. You can get the show notes for every Farmer to Farmer podcast in your inbox by signing up for my email newsletter at farmertofarmerpodcast.com. And finally, I appreciate all of the great guest suggestions that I received through the suggestions form on farmertofarmerpodcast.com. Please let me know who you would like to hear from. I'll do my best to get them on the show. Thank you for listening. Be safe out there and keep the tractor running.